When the idea that a legit Wizarding World MMO surfaced, one of the first questions to naturally follow was when and where this game would take place. I've got a couple theories, but the one I'm keen on is going to take us all the way to Camelot. Hello crows and non-crows alike, my name is Joe Mac, otherwise known as Support Crow, and today I'm going to try to convince you to go back in time.
Mysterious thing, time. Powerful, and when meddled with, dangerous.
Now, before we dive straight into the theory, we need to consider what an MMO is and what an MMO needs. An MMO is a massive multiplayer online game, and when I say massive, I mean massive. This is a game that needs to hold tens and even hundreds of thousands of players at a given time. For example, Final Fantasy XIV has roughly 70 million registered players across its lifespan since 2014. Does that mean that 70 million players are playing the game right now? No, but roughly 20,000 are playing the game on Steam at the time of me writing this script. The max peak of 14's player count on Steam was just over 95,000. However, also keep in mind that this is just Steam counts on a game that is cross-platform. Whenever an expansion for the game is released, the total player count active in-game can easily surpass hundreds of thousands. Then you have a beast like World of Warcraft, which is a 21-year-old game that has roughly 160 million registered players and has a daily active player count of around 250,000. Imagine 250,000 people crowding the Great Hall in Hogwarts. It'd be an introvert's nightmare. MMOs are big, and every single one of them requires at least one thing: space. All of those thousands of players need somewhere to go. This becomes a problem for the Wizarding World because of a fundamental aspect of its world building: the Statute of Secrecy. The Statute of Secrecy, mandated by the International Confederation of Wizards since 1692, requires the Wizarding Society to hide itself from the Muggle world. In other words, between 1692 and the present day, we're heavily restricted in where we can go in the Wizarding World online. Sure, we can hold up at Hogwarts for years on end, but we run into a problem called lagfest. When there's so many people huddled in one location that it starts breaking the game because the server is trying to maintain its player retention, and it just can't do it. We can create years of content, sure, but we eventually have to break out and away from Hogwarts, Diagon Alley, and Hogsmeade. When it comes to the continued development of an MMO, the most valued resource a studio uses is digital real estate. The Statute of Secrecy is a fundamental world builder that ironically shrinks the world instead of building on it. It is a barrier that pushes against the natural expansion of MMO development. It works for books, movies, TV shows, and even a game like Hogwarts Legacy, but for an MMO it hinders more than it helps. So how do we get around this? Well, the answer is pretty simple, and it leads into our theory today. We simply have the setting take place during a time that's either before the Statute of Secrecy or after. This gives us two fun options. We can either go into the future, past Harry Potter's time, into a more modern setting, where the Wizarding World has been fully exposed, and the conflict revolves around the two worlds trying to reunite and get over their differences. This would give us not only the freedom to explore the entire world, but also experience the continuation of the overall narrative of the Wizarding World. Or, and I'm leaning more in this direction, we go to a time before the law was passed. In fact, let's go all the way back to what I consider to be the most interesting era of Wizarding World history, the Age of Merlin. According to Wizarding World lore, the medieval times period of this universe is around 993 AD and includes the founding of Hogwarts, the court of King Arthur, and the rise of the Order of Merlin.
Well, you all know, of course, that Hogwarts was founded over 1,000 years ago by the four greatest witches and wizards of the age: Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin.
This was an age where wizards and muggles coexisted. A muggle seeing a group of witches fly on broomsticks while traveling to the market was just another weekday happenstance. This was a world that did not hide anything magical. Wizards did not make any efforts to hide dragons and garden gnomes. There was no secret alleyways filled with magical shops. and there was no task force to wipe memories away. Everything was out in the open in broad daylight, which is a complete contrast to how the Wizarding World is today. You had Muggle blacksmiths forging armor right next to wizard wand makers. In fact, a lot of what we know about the world during the Wizarding World version of medieval times is vastly different from what most people think it is. For example, Hogwarts during this time did not look like this. Instead, it looked like this. The founders of Hogwarts were also the only teachers during this time, taking turns using the Great Hall for lessons in between breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It would be many years before each house got its own dormitory and each subject got its own classroom. I actually theorized one of the main reasons why Hogsmeade was built was to house an overflow of Hogwarts students. Magical education during this time should not be like how it was in the books or movies. It was not some fantasy magic boarding school. These students had a medieval style apprenticeship and faced the trials and tribulations associated with that. These apprentices were likely indentured for a set amount of time, and within that time, they'd be fed and clothed and lodged and taught whatever skills they needed to learn to satisfy the desires of wizarding families that likely had some wealth. I'm probably adding too much real-world logic to this, but my point stands. Being a Hogwarts student in medieval times was not, or at least should not, be anything like what it's like being a student today. There was also no Department of Magical Education at this time. Do you think the safety standards are bad now at Hogwarts? Try 1,000 years ago when the Ministry of Magic didn't even exist. You know what else didn't exist during this time? Diagon Alley. The famous Wizarding Shop Street would not be built until the 1500s. So where are you going to get all your school supplies? Well, how about Camelot? The famed city and seat of King Arthur, protected by the Knights of the Round Table and the Order of Merlin. Every MMO needs a main trading hub, and the markets of Camelot would be perfect for that. However, is Camelot the only kingdom during the medieval times? Well, yes and no. In Muggle history, you had 4 kingdoms: Mercia, Northumbria, Wessex, and East Anglia. But in 1929 AD, England was unified under King Athelstan, which was 64 years before the founding of Hogwarts, and even more years before Merlin and King Arthur and Camelot. So, medieval Wizarding World lore simply doesn't work with real-world history, but who cares at this point? I mean, according to Pottermore, MACUSA, the Magical Congress of the United States of America, was founded in 1693. You know what didn't exist in 1693? The United States of America. So, pack up what you know of history and throw it out the window. But maybe that's a good thing. In many ways, the Age of Merlin provides a blank canvas for unique storytelling and gameplay. We can tell a Wizarding World version of King Arthur and the Knights of Camelot. We can interact with the founders of Hogwarts and learn from them. We can use different weapons in addition to wands, choosing to be knights like Sir Cadogan, waving swords around and slinging spells. We can interact with magical creatures that went extinct long before the present day. We can traverse an entire world and delve into dungeons, discover myths and legends, and fight formidable foes, based not only on Wizarding World lore, but also medieval folklore and Arthurian legend. Perhaps we could even join the ranks of the Order of Merlin, or perhaps align ourselves with the Knights of Walpurgis, which were the original Death Eaters. The Age of Merlin is a gold mine of possibility that's ripe for the taking, and it's the perfect setting for an MMO. That is why my theory is that this Wizarding World online game will take place roughly 50 to 60 years after the founding of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. I'm betting that we'll learn from one of the 4 founders, then we'll have to choose to either align ourselves with Merlin or Morgan Le Fay to either protect or destroy Camelot, all the while dealing with the rising tensions between magical and non-magical society, choosing to either improve the situation or make it worse. But what do you think? Would you rather have a Wizarding World online game set in the far past or the present day and beyond? Let me know down in the comments. I look forward to seeing what your theories are on when this game could take place. It'll likely be years before we get an answer. MMOs take a long time to develop. We might even see the sequel to Hogwarts Legacy before we see Wizarding World Online. And speaking of Hogwarts Legacy, be sure to stick around for the next vid where I list off 5 things Hogwarts Legacy 2 needs to have. Until then though, be safe, be well, be kind, bye bye.